Thank you so much for tuning in. You are watching our Food for Thought series with the one and only Dr. MJ. And we are very excited because we are now on the letter W. And I'm pretty sure I know who you selected, but for entertainment's sake, who have we selected for the letter W? And what is the quote?
I've got Alice Walker, the only possible W. And the book that I picked is In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. I have my Alice Walker wall over there. I've got most of her novels and some of her essays, and there's many to choose from that are quite amazing. But this particular book made a big impact on me. So this is why I am choosing it.
Okay.
And the passage I'm reading is where she's actually writing about another writer. A lot of this book is about writing, right? Her as a writer. One of my favorite things to read from writers is their takes on writing and the process of writing, which seems to be today's theme if we really think about it. Like,
really?
How did you become a writer? So she's got a great book on, this is one of her great books. Bell Hooks has an amazing book on writing. Called Wounds of Passion. A lot of my favorite writers write about writing. So, but here she's writing about a writer that inspired her, who is Zora Neale Hurston, who did not become famous until after her death, as far as I know. She was in a moment during like the Harlem Renaissance, she was known, and then she died in obscurity, and then Alice Walker literally went to her grave and resurrected her. And this is the essay that's partly about that. So she said, I became aware of my need of Zora Neale Hurston's work sometime before I knew her work existed. In late 1970, I was writing a story that required accurate material on voodoo practices among rural Southern Blacks of the 30s. There seemed none available I could trust. A number of white racist anthropologists and folklorists of the period had, not surprisingly, disappointed and insulted me. They thought Blacks inferior, peculiar, and comic, and for me, this undermined, destroyed, the relevance of their books. Fortunately, it was then that I discovered Mules and Men, Zora's book on folklore, collecting herself and her small all-Black community of Eatonville, Florida. Because she immersed herself in her own culture, even as she recorded its big old lies, i.e. folk tales, it was possible to see how she and it, even after she'd attended Barnard College and become a respected writer and apprentice anthropologist, fit together. The authenticity of her material was verified by her familiarity with its context, and I was soothed by her assurance that she was exposing not simply an adequate culture, but a superior one. That Black people can be on occasion peculiar and comic was knowledge she enjoyed. That they could be racially or culturally inferior to whites never seems to have crossed her mind. And then she goes on as to the first time she heard Zora's name. Then she talks about reading, like going in and discovering all of her books and how much she loved her because, despite her having written in the 1930s, which if you think about American history, like how hard it would have been for a Black woman to be a writer at that time, that she wrote about Black people in real, like complex, loving ways that shows that she knew them and loved them, as opposed to if you're going to read, white anthropologists' take on Zora. There's something in here that I can't read because it's not appropriate, but she says, Zora was before her time in intellectual circles and the lifestyle she chose. Zora was a cultural revolutionary simply because she was always herself. And then in all of it, this ends with her saying, we are a people. And so the long and short of it is, after she discovers Zora's work in the footnote of a white anthropology text, she digs her up, finds more of her work, then is like obsessed with her, and is like, I have to go discover who this woman is. Goes to Eatonville, Florida to look for this woman's unmarked grave. And this is before Alice Walker becomes a big name writer. And she meets another woman who's weirdly on this similar quest, pretends to be her niece. It's a crazy story and it's written in this book. Pretends to be her niece, finds out who she is, finds the grave, goes and gets her own money. She's not rich yet, and like marks the grave and like gives it a proper marking and then honoring, and then basically single-handedly resurrects, as she herself becomes famous, single-handedly resurrects Zora Neale Hurston's work and shares it. And then, you know, she died poor. Mm-hmm. She died without money, without recognition, like beyond her time. Mm-hmm. And, you know, she resurrects her. And this is what she says in the last part of this chapter. We're a people do not throw their geniuses away. And if they are thrown away, it is our duty as artists and as witnesses for the future to collect them again for the sake of our children. And if necessary, bone by bone. So,
wow.
And so, okay, listen, that thing hit me so much that I wrote about it as well. Like, so I just told you why that shook me, but I also wrote about why that shook me in my own essay.
Okay.
Titled, and you see the book is there it's a collage. It's actually like a collage that I made, but it has some of the stuff that I've just been talking about, the black feminist anthologies, but it's got In Search of Our Mother's Gardens right there. And so the title of this thing that I wrote is, you know, Fragments in Search of Antecedents, like a fragment as a small part broken or separated off something, and an antecedent is something that came before you, that caused you. So she said she had to find Zora Neale Hurston for her to believe that she could even be a writer. And she did. And she resurrected, marked her grave and resurrected her whole legacy. Mm-hmm. And here I'm like talking about how this particular book, because in the book she doesn't just, I'm not going to read this, but in the book she doesn't, so I say she got me thinking about in the book she does not just celebrate Zora Neale Hurston. She talks about her mother and her grandmother who could not be writers because they were either enslaved or they were sharecroppers. They were exploited laborers right after slavery, right? But they still created. So her grandmother made quilts. That's an art form. That's a form of storytelling. Her mother, which is the title of the book, made these beautiful gardens, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also creation and storytelling, right? That's a form of art as well. So when I read this, you know, it had me thinking about all the people that I know that, you know, like yourself, like myself, closeted writers. I thought about my mom who writes songs. She writes songs about the genocide, and, you know, they're not, she sings them to me. She leaves them on voicemails for me, right? So this piece moves me because it's like, we shouldn't be throwing away our geniuses and we should be resurrecting them, collecting them. But at the same time, you know, if we kind of weave it with the writer from this book, we should kind of recognize the circumstances that have made it difficult for us to feel free to express ourselves, to create, to trust our creations, to share our creations. So I love that book for that, for really making me think. There's so many creative geniuses that we've never heard of. There's so many creative geniuses among us. We have creativity that we're afraid to express because of, you know, how we've been told, you know, what counts as genius or what counts as creative or what counts as good writing or, you know, worth sharing, etc. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. There's much more I could share about Alice Walker. That book of essays is one of my favorites.
I can't imagine how difficult it must be for certain writers. I mean, particularly Alice Walker. Like, how did you select that quote out of all? Like, was the process of figuring out which quote difficult, or did you just did it just come to you almost naturally because it resonates so much, or because you appreciate it so much? Like, I guess people.
It's maybe because I wrote about this essay.
Right.
So that's why it stayed with me the most.
Yeah.
But it stayed with me the most. Like this book, like, so when I wrote about it, I was like, I was reading the book while I was at like, Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed recently, the Vietnamese Buddhist leader, I guess. I was at one of his retreat centers, which I've never heard, like, is a cool retreat center because you could sit on a hammock and read. Yeah. And I was completely lost in that book. I was reading that book and I was reading a book by June Jordan at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I went with her on the search for Zora Neale Hurston. I was so, like, that story moved. So she's an amazing novelist. Like, her novels, like, you fall into the worlds that she paints for. She's one of the best writers I've ever, just in terms of painting you a picture of a scene, of a place, of a time, and the characters that she has. There's many memorable characters, many memorable stories. Mm-hmm. But that's the one that, I don't know, that stayed because of that, the work she did to dig up Zora Neale Hurston and bring her back to life, essentially.
Listen, and that's not everyone's wish, that someone is there to bring out their genius or to brighten up whatever skill or whatever passion or hobby or whatever it might be, just having someone who cares. And like the fact that she found her name in the footnotes.
That's the part.
And it's not like Google, like I'm guessing Google wasn't popping back then. Like she physically got on a plane or on a bus or whatever and went across the country.
Yeah. Like, I have to find this woman. Like, I need her. And so I'm going to find her. So her relationship with Zora Neale Hurston is my relationship with all of these people. Like, I need these people. Thankfully, most of them got their dues, but I guess the book left me thinking, like, how many people are geniuses though, and creative, how many stories, how many histories, how many, how much beauty are we missing because we don't allow ourselves to share it, or because the people around us have not been allowed to share it for whatever circumstances, including our parents. I think a lot about my mom. That essay, the book is called In Search of Our Mother's Garden. So it made me think of my mother, made me think of my ancestors. So
if that is any inspiration, motivation, or if this is what anyone needed today, this is the book to pick up and to start your path to discovering or just going with your instinct and gut and living in your genius.
Find your own garden.
Find your own garden. I love it. All right, we will be right back with our next letter. I can't believe how far we are. This is wild. Wild. Okay, we'll be right back.